Hey, good afternoon. It's Patrick Cobb. I'm talking about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans from Fernbanks Chapter 10. I'm going to start with a timeline of some of the actual events going back to August 26th, where Governor Kathleen Blanco declares a state of emergency in Louisiana. On the next day, Governor Blanco asked President Bush to declare a federal state of emergency, and the White House does announce a federal emergency, giving DHS and FEMA authority to respond. On the 28th, New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin orders a mandatory evacuation. 30,000 people are somehow at the Superdome with 36 hours of food, and the National Guard in Louisiana requests 700 buses for evacuations. On the 29th of August, that fateful day where Katrina made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, water begins to flow over a levee and pumping stations are not operating in the lower 9th Ward. FEMA requests 1,000 personnel to the Katrina areas, but the AP reported that employees had 2 days to report, so a major lag of communication between asking employees to report and when they were there. A Bucktown levee is breached, and Governor Blanco requests assistance from the president. Blanco, quote, "We need everything you got." On the 30th of August, the blame game begins as 80% of New Orleans is underwater. The Pentagon claimed that there was enough National Guard in the area to handle the needs. August 31st, the National Guard troops do arrive. Local shelters reporting food and water supply was nearly gone. Reports of 80,000 people trapped within homes, communities somewhere across the area, and 3,000 stranded at the Morale Convention Center without food or water. September 1, President Bush, quote, "I don't think anybody anticipated the breach of the levees." And this was also the same day of Mayor Nagin's infamous oration to Bush and Blanco to get off your rear ends, one of his most infamous speeches ever given, and kind of adding a little more fuel to the fire when it comes to collaboration, no collaboration and cooperation. September 2nd, Bush praises FEMA Director Brownie. "You're doing a heck of a job." We all remember that famous quote, news clip there. The National Guard arrives in force with food and water. September the 3rd, President blames state and local officials for the slow response in New Orleans. As we continue on, the September 4th, the Superdome, which was home to many people camping out and just with anything that they had with, is completely evacuated. September 5th, the breach is closed and water begins to be pumped out of the city. September 6th, Nagin orders forced evacuations as the city is deemed not safe. September 9th, FEMA Director Brown is removed from Katrina relief efforts. And on September the 12th, FEMA Director Brown resigns as the director of FEMA. So it's kind of a short, quick, and concise timeline of some of the activities happened prior to landfall until right after, some with the recovery and some of the crisis going on in New Orleans. So here's a copy of what Kathleen Blanco's August letter, 27th letter to President Bush said, requesting declaring an emergency for the state of Louisiana prior to the landfall. She was asking for the affected areas, parishes, southeastern parishes, including New Orleans metro area, mid-state to Interstate I-49 corridor, and some along the I-20 corridor. So you can see that she was doing her proper documentation as an elected official. So Mayor Nagin's on the 27th, his folks in the city of New Orleans had set up a communication center at the local hotel there. They didn't really know exactly what to expect, it sounds like. Nagin's in one of his press statements tells residents who hadn't left town already to evacuate, quote, "This is a test. This is not a test. This is a real deal thing. It could change. But as right now, New Orleans is definitely the target for this hurricane." So now that we've got a situation knowing that landfall is 2 days away, and now they're telling these folks it's time to get out. So why, what, who, where, and how? So as we remember, the first stages of a crisis, our prodrome stage, was a point before a crisis when warning signs are analyzed and heeded. You know that there had to be weather bulletins, computer models of showing the forecast tracked from the weather services, Air Force weather tracking equipment that looking for hurricane trackers and those kind of things. And we knew that levees were not prepared to handle the massive amounts of water. So crisis management and crisis communication plans are developed based on these warnings and hopefully to avoid the worst case scenario. So in New Orleans, one of the issues, a part of the evacuation plans, that certain segments were not considered by the plan. People who were too ill to evacuate, people with pets who would not bear to leave them, people who did not have cars or money for gas or a place to go, and a great number of people who just decided to sit out the storm due to warnings to evacuate so many times before that it deemed false and irrelevant and not heeded warnings. So we've got a perfect storm brewing here of people and why they didn't evacuate. So in New Orleans, it was a perfect storm, and nearly 80% of the city lies below sea level. The levees and the flood walls were built to protect the city from the floodwaters were old and aging. The levees would work against 95% of all hurricanes. The levees would withstand up to perhaps a Category 3 storm. And if a rare Category 4 or 5 hurricane were to hit New Orleans, engineers warned that the strong storm surge would either pour over the levees or destroy them. Protecting the city from strong hurricanes would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and Louisiana could not afford it, and it was not a priority of the federal government. So all these things are starting to add up and understanding why New Orleans and Katrina became the perfect storm of a crisis communication plan gone bad. And then you had confusion and chaos from state, local, and federal government authorities. We had the federal folks blaming the state folks blaming the local folks blaming federal folks, and the blame game just started constantly going around on the media. So crisis planning went wrong in the first stage. Planners just assumed and hoped that what had never happened would never happen. So what happens is that the planners just assumed, with all of the information they had, that hoped it would never happen, but in fact it actually did happen, and we knew exactly what happened in those next few days in New Orleans, where the city became underwater and now has, 13, 14 years later, has recovered to once again the vibrant city that we know New Orleans to be.